Hello, my friends. I had a fantastic question on my last video of, do I have any suggestions of how to pray during recovery? And yeah, I do. I have some really helpful ones. To just preface this, my personal background with this is I was raised Christian, well, devout Catholic, very, very devout, um, to an unhealthy degree. But I can say for myself, even though I moved away from that structure, that for me at least, so you know me and where I'm coming from, like my relationship with God has been at the core of my existence, my being, my way of existing in the world since I was a small child. I had my first like mystic experience when I was like 5. So that's kind of been my life. It still is that way. The form has changed. So that's where I'm coming from with this, is this very relational position with God, very mystical, very much like genuine direct relationship. So my suggestion, and the best suggestion in recovery, is this. This is an analogy I heard somewhere and I was like, wow, that is so true. So it's the cake analogy. You ask God for a cake and he gives you eggs, butter, sugar, flour, baking soda, and a pan, and a whole lot of heat. And there's another great scene from Evan Almighty. I haven't even watched the whole movie, but the scene I found on Instagram, and it was like, oh wow, that, you know, it's the character who plays God, Morgan Freeman, saying to this woman, you know, like, you know, if you pray for patience, God's going to give you opportunities to be patient. If you pray for strength or you pray for greater family closeness, he's going to give you opportunities to love your family or opportunities to build your strength. So the bottom line of all of this is that when we ask for something, or we're in that relationship where we're wanting God to help us in some way, he's going to give us the ingredients. And we know to look for that. It is so much easier to work with. So that's the first thing. Is I prayed for strength. Personally, I prayed for clarity. I prayed for wisdom and patience and faith and trust, because those are things like faith and trust are such a pivotal part of this process, even from a totally non-religious standpoint, because from a brain science standpoint, or even non-spiritual, like we're training our brain and we're choosing to create new neural pathways and have an experience we've never had before. And brains can only feel certain of things they've already experienced as predictable, meaning that you've experienced the same thing many times and had the same outcome. It's like when babies are little and they get in the high chair and they just sit there, and it's like amazing. Like they'll sit there and they'll just keep throwing things and like over and over and over again, just watching it fall to the ground. They're learning that no matter what you throw, it all goes to the ground. And when we haven't had this experience of a neuroplastic approach and the effect that has on our brain, on our nervous system, and we haven't seen where we're going yet, we're going to have, we either are going to be stuck in doubt and fear, or we can choose faith and trust. So those are things I prayed for a lot and asked for. And this leads to the second part, which was praying from a posture of actually wanting the answer. I know that might sound strange, but especially because we're venturing into the unknown by definition in recovery. It requires us to change. It requires us to be strong in different ways than we're used to. And most often the answers to prayer come in forms of struggles or challenge, those opportunities, those ingredients. But also it's not what we would expect. And it's often not something we like. So I definitely myself have experienced praying in a posture of very toddler demanding, like, I just want what I want and I want it now. Can you just give it to me? But like, there was no open-heartedness in that. It was just kind of a constant, like, banging on the door, but almost not expecting it to be opened or not wanting it to be. And also that like tantrum that I talk about this a lot. We get so activated that we're out of our minds. Like, there were times where I'd be praying, but I was really just like desperately scratching for relief from God. And it wasn't really a heartfelt, open-hearted prayer where I was really prepared to receive a response. So that was part of it, was the posture that the prayer is made in of, you know, am I really ready for an answer? Am I expecting an answer? Am I looking for it? Which leads to the second part of this, which is that prayer is a conversation. And most of structured religious traditions focus more on us talking to God and less on creating the environments within ourselves where we can actually hear him, and also committing devoted time spent to practicing listening and practicing being capable of hearing, and then practicing being capable of taking what we hear and actually putting it into practice. that's really where the transformation and the real relating with God for me started. And it started in recovery, especially because of, again, how unknown all of, like, there's all the, everything's kind of up in the air. So the number one thing with that part of it is to recognize that we don't actually know God. Like, everybody has an idea of God. We all have an idea of ourselves and other people. To really make a point when we pray, whether we're speaking or listening, to try to, even if it's just a little itty bitty tiny part of you, to try to bring yourself into the awareness that this is an infinite intelligence, this is an infinite loving being, that I don't really know what God is. I don't know. God knows and has a bigger, like, truly such a bigger picture. Bringing that bit of willingness to admit how much we don't know into that posture, and willingness to actually have the intention of being in a real relationship with a real God, and not the one that we have in our mind of what we think God would say, or what we think God is, how he should behave, or how we should behave, or how things should go. That is a recipe for resentment. Unspoken expectations are just premeditated resentment. It's a classic quote, and I know for me at least, that played out with God more than any other relationship. So that might be my projection, but I thought it was worth including here. So that's the biggest thing, is using your tools to create stillness. A calm mind is one that can actually hear, because our ego's out of the way. Our desperation is, at least a bit bridled. It might not be gone really fully out of the way, but like we can kind of see around the desperation and actually maybe hear a little bit of like something genuine, other than being so afraid of the answer, because it's like, I don't want to hear something I don't want to hear. So like, I asked you for an answer, or I asked you for guidance, and then I'm like so afraid of the answer that I'm like, oh, but I don't really want to hear it. So trying to create some space, whatever that looks like for you, having a practice every day of listening. And the last thing I'll say on that is that silence is an answer. And what that answer is, at least for me. So again, I'm human, so I'm going to share what I've experienced, that often when I would pray for something, sometimes there'd be this very pointed silence. And it wasn't negative in any way, but it was more like a parent or a teacher where you're like asking them for help over and over again. And it's at some point they step back and they're kind of like, I gave you everything you need. Like, did you listen? Are you paying attention? Or it's time for you to learn this for yourself. Like, you need to step up and learn. And you need to struggle through learning, just like a parent, where they'll teach you to, tie your shoelaces or do the math problem, and they'll show it to you 5 times. They'll walk you through it. And then when you're still sitting there going, but I don't understand, I don't know, they'll step back and kind of be like, all right, well, now it's time for you to figure it out, so that when you struggle through it, you actually learn. When you try and you fail and you fumble, you learn. So I learned that silence was for me, at least, so often, not every time, but very, very, very often, it was an invitation to rise to my own stature as a child of God. Like, God's job was to raise me, not to like coddle me and keep me as his child forever, but to raise me to be a co-creator with him, not somebody who's just perpetually, developmentally stunted and leaning on him like I'm still 3 years old. But saying like, you can do it. You've got to become stronger. You've got to do things you don't like doing. You've got to actually apply yourself. And I know this isn't pretty, but this is your life. You take responsibility for it. Like, I gave you everything you need. You've got the eggs and stuff. Like, go. Yeah, you might crack one on your, foot or whatever. Like, you might burn yourself in the oven before, but go figure it out. So that became helpful for me at times when I was in that kind of unconscious screaming, banging on the door state, when I realized there was so much just like, radiant silence. I was like, oh, I think that's the clue that I just need to get to it and start working and figure it out, because I am a grown up, and rely on God to keep providing, necessary help. But yeah, so that's my take on prayer. It's much more relational than say these words or do this formula. But hopefully, if you're in that position of how do I pray in recovery, this can shed a little bit of inspiration or light for you. Love you guys.